All black, everything. Everything black. Culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back. Black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're here as usual in the John Hope Franklin Center here at Duke University. And today we are joined by Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts, who is the pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, president of the University of New York College at Old Westbury, and also the chairman and founder of the Abyssinian Development Corporation. Thanks for joining us here
Glad
today.
to be here, bro.
You're here in Duke, visiting the Duke Divinity School for the Gardner C. Taylor Lecture. Talk about just the impact of Gardner C. Taylor in terms of Black religious studies, in terms of, I've never had the chance to hear him in person, but just, what I've heard about his preaching style, just in terms of it being influential.
Well, Gardner C. Taylor was a major influence in my ministry. In fact, he is responsible in large degree after Samuel Proctor for my being at the Abyssinian Baptist Church. Well, actually, it was Lawrence Neal Jones, Samuel Proctor, and then Gardner Taylor just told me to stay put where I was. But he was considered, and I still consider him, the best preacher I've ever heard in the English language. He was a powerful force.
I mean, that's high praise.
You would find many who agree with me. The first time I heard him preach, I almost walked away from ministry. I said I couldn't possibly. But he was very encouraging, very nurturing, and he did this for countless ministers. Plus, he was a statesman of the ministry. He represented the ministry well everywhere. He was very thoughtful politically, socially active. He built a school, he built a nursing home. He was outspoken on social issues and a progressive thinker. So he was a homiletician par excellence, and he was an outstanding representative of the Christian ministry, period.
I was looking at your website, and there's a photo of you preaching with a copy of Raphael Warnock's The Divided Mind of the Black Church.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about, with everybody debating now in the New York Times about the state of the Black church, and of course, with all of the kind of prosperity gospel stuff, that's popping off, how are you feeling about the Black church these days?
Well, if you make reference initially to Raphael Warnock, I feel very good. Dr. Warnock is one of the outstanding young men in ministry today, and I applaud his efforts and his thinking. So when I look at people like Raphael Warnock, when I look at people like Otis Moss III, when I look at people like Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, when I look at men and women who represent what I consider to be the cutting edge of ministry today, I'm enthusiastic, and I'm very bullish on the Black church. I believe there's a lot that will be done in the name of God through these young ministers. I believe there are a number of challenges that they can help us to meet because they are progressive in their thinking, they are more in tune with social media, and they are well read, and they've been trained by some of the best, both Dr. Turman, Dr. Warnock, and many others have been trained by Gary Dorian out of Union Seminary. But premier among them all is James Hal Cone, Jim Cone. So I'm very enthusiastic about the Black church. Men like Dr. Gardner Calvin Taylor, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, women like Prathia Hall Wynne have all left indelible marks on us. And we know what our responsibility is. We know what our calling is. And I think that as a result of that, even though we have, we've always had that though. We've had the Prophet Joneses, we've had the Reverend Ikes, we've had
Daddy Grace,
Daddy Graces,
right,
the Father Divines.
Yeah.
So some of these mega church pastors who deal just on the material level and with personality, that too shall pass. And I think at the core, and the other thing we're not talking about are the men and women who pastor churches the size of maybe 100, 150. They not only pastor churches, they drive buses, they are chauffeurs, they are physician's assistants.
Right, and not just to get people to church, right? I mean, helping them get to the voting booths and to their doctor's appointments, and yeah.
But I mean, they also have other jobs. Right. they have other jobs. Yeah. And those churches, with those men and women faithful on Sunday, preaching the gospel, are the ones we need to take care of, watch, pray for, because they're the ones that are sustaining us.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts, Abyssinian Baptist Church. In many ways, when I think about the arc of your career, you are really a Renaissance man. You know, what person who is overseeing such, an important institution like Abyssinian Baptist Church decides to become a president of a university?
That's the Holy Spirit, man. I didn't plan that.
But what's it like balancing, both your impact, in the sacred spiritual world versus your impact in the secular world?
Well, Mark, you're well read. You know that. For most of us, the minister in rural, suburban, and urban churches often had the two jobs. Yeah. But many times, the minister was also the principal of the high school or a teacher in the school. Or if I take even examples in higher education, Samuel Proctor was full professor at Rutgers. Right. Benjamin Elijah Mays, President Morehouse College, was a Baptist minister. And Lawrence Neal Jones, United Church of Christ, was dean of the Howard Divinity School and dean of Union Theological Seminary. Education and faith, this is my mantra, are the Tigris and the Euphrates of our redemption, twin rivers at the source of our liberation. We've always put the two together. And one of the most horrible insults to black people is a minister who refuses to get a decent education.
Yeah. It's been a long time for those of us who are young enough to remember Calvin Butts steamrolling rap CDs. And I always appreciate the fact, I mentioned to you before that, I had the chance to interview you long time ago, when you were at Chautauqua Institution, and talking about, at that time I didn't know quite who Calvin Butts was versus these kind of images that had circulated in popular culture. And so it was never, I think, a question about whether or not you were committed to the folks in your community, right? Mm-hmm. That was always something that was important. You're in New York City now, and of course, you ministered through Giuliani time.
Yes, sir.
It's now de Blasio time. Mm-hmm. How are you feeling about de Blasio time, and how do you reconcile the promise of Bill de Blasio's, mayor versus incidents like the killing of Eric Gardner?
Number one, Giuliani was a racist then, he's a racist now. Number two, I have hope for de Blasio, but I've said to the Abyssinian congregation, if the murderers of Eric Garner are at least not removed from the police department by the present police commissioner, then we ought to remove, that police commissioner ought to be removed, Bill Bratton, and ultimately we ought to put pressure on de Blasio. And I know that people say, well, it's a little early, Reverend. I mean, he's only been in there a year, but my point is, unless you begin to organize around moving politically, that's voting, that's creating public opinion, you will continue to see more of the same. The police in New York have to know that their commissioner and their mayor will not stand for this. Now, we're giving Bill de Blasio the benefit of that doubt. I've talked with him on a couple of occasions. He knows how passionately we feel about this because, there was Michael Stewart, there was
there's a history.
There's a history.
Yeah.
And so my sermon around that was a takeoff of Malcolm. It's the ballad of the bullet. Yeah. I mean, enough is enough. So we do believe that the ballot is powerful. And we do believe that by creating public opinion around an elected official, and I think that de Blasio will listen. So I'm hopeful.
In many ways, he gets a pass in New York City because of how badly municipal leaders in Ferguson reacted to what, has gone down there in the aftermath of Mike Brown's shooting. when you were going back into the pulpit in the midst of all this stuff happening in Ferguson, I mean, what are you saying to your parishioners who feel as much anger as any of those folks do in Ferguson? I mean, Ferguson is really just a microcosm for what's happening around the country in terms of aggressive policing. What kind of message do you give, as a man of the cloth?
Well, the message for the man of the cloth was the battle of the bullet. And, it was 50 years ago that Malcolm gave that talk. And my point is that, I do a takeoff of Adam, when I look at the killing of Michael Brown and what happened in Ferguson. And Adam used to say, not burn, baby, burn, but earn, baby, earn, learn, baby, learn. And so I do that trying to encourage. I remember an intern minister, Reverend Rashad Moore, who's with me now. I finished the sermon, he said, but Reverend, we heard all that, but you still didn't quite tell us what to do. And I remember I had to get back up and say, all right, this is what and then call de Blasio's name, call Bratton's name, and then begin to talk about the concrete steps we would take. So we're waiting to see what the grand jury will do. Then we're waiting to see what Bratton will do. And I haven't taken my eyes off of that. And then ultimately, if he doesn't do what he should do, the grand jury doesn't do what it should do, then we're going to take a hard look at de Blasio. We're going to watch him. Now this will unfold, but I'm not going to encourage people to, of course, riot and loot and burn. And I am also encouraging people to be careful about who they listen to.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people who are provocateurs, black people, who are trying to incite us to actions that really won't pay off for no one but them.
What's the message for your students at Old Westbury?
Well, at Old Westbury, it is to focus on your studies. Make sure you graduate in 4 to 6 years. We have the most diverse population in the State University of New York. It has grown, man. I'm so proud of that school. Yeah. It's up now to the largest enrollment in its history. We've got master's programs. I want those young men and women to come out there with bachelor's degrees in sociology and and biology, in physics. I want them ready, because the world that they face is the world in which they're going to have to compete. And they're competing with the world, not just with Long Island, not just with New York City. So for them, if they get involved in protests, that's fine with me. If they express themselves with a certain level of outrage against the system that would do this, that's fine with me. As their president, I encourage all social activity that seeks to put pressure on an unjust system. But in the midst of all that, I remember once I was part of a group that locked up the trustees at Morehouse College. And there was
so you were in the room with Sam Jackson?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, no. I take that back. I take that back. I was not in the room with Sam. Sam and those were inside. They got inside before I did. Sam was, when I think about it now, Sam Jackson was a very courageous brother. Yeah. He's one of the best that Morehouse has produced. And so I wasn't inside, I was outside, but I was outside raising the same hell that they were on the inside. And one of the vice presidents of Morehouse told me later, after I was a minister at Abyssinian, he said, you know what I did? I said, what? He said, the minute I saw you out there, he knew my mother and father. He said, I went to the registrar's office to check your grades. And he said, when I saw your grades were good, then I had to come back and pay attention. So I'm saying, if there are any students from Old Westbury and you decide to get out there and raise hell, I'm going to check your grades first. Get your grades straight. I want you to graduate.
You're watching Left of Black, and we're joined today by Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts, pastor at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, president of the State University of New York College at Old Westbury. You mentioned Adam Clayton Powell a second ago, and there's no way to think about being in that church without thinking about that incredible legacy. But are you going to follow his footsteps in 2016?
See, Mark, you just the instigator. I don't think so. I've had many opportunities to do it.
And apparently the energy.
Well, the energy, but maybe not the fire in the belly for that political office. Yeah. Now, if you ask me about the United States Senate, I might come back and think about it. But listen, the Congress needs I worked to get Charles Rangel, the
Yeah.
honorable,
Yes.
the honorable Charles Rangel, reelected this time.
Yeah.
He said that he would not run again. I believe him. The person that needs to go in that office needs to be somewhere between 40 and 50. They need to be prepared to stay as long as they can, of course, for the next 20, 25 years and build up the seniority and the knowledge of the Congress
That Rangel had.
that Rangel had, or that any person could get as a result of their longevity, so that they can really negotiate,
Yeah.
so that they can really get legislation through, so that they can be there to vote on the bills. I've had a wonderful ministry at Abyssinian. It's been challenging now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I don't want anybody to think, don't just say, oh, that seemed like easy. No, it's been challenging. And I've been at Old Westbury 15 years. That defies the odds, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And the only office that I might be interested in would be a United States Senate seat.
Because you can be a statesperson. You
Well,
can't be a statesperson in the Congress.
6 years, maybe
Right.
you do 2 terms.
Right.
You know, then it's time to get out anyway. And only God knows if I'll make it that long on this earth. But what I'm saying to you is that congressional seat deserves a young woman, a man,
Yeah.
who can really give it the time and the energy to get what we can get out of it.
Yeah. You mentioned Congressman Rangel, and very often when I talk about growing up in New York and talk to my students about what Black Power looked like, in many ways, you know, the big four, you know, Rangel, Basil Patterson, Percy Sutton, David Dinkins, you know, they were really the embodiment of everything that Malcolm talked about, at least in the political arena, electoral politics arena in the 70s and 80s. Talk about what New York was like. You know, when they're at the peak of their talents and their skills, you know.
Percy Sutton told me the story in a private moment. He said that Adam knew that they were out there, these young guys, these young Turks. He said Adam would call them into the office and say, well, see you guys out there stirring up trouble. He said, I tell you what, he said, I'm getting older now. I think I'm going to step aside, you know, so you guys get ready. He said, Percy said they go out, man, and organize and, you know, talk to J. Raymond Jones, try to get stuff together. And then he said it looked like Adam was going to back up. And then he said when election time came, Adam would just beat him in the ground. Beat him in the. He said it was almost a misuse, you know, because he was so strong.
Right.
And he said, but once they got an opportunity, and contrary to what a lot of people think, Adam was very smart. And he was not necessarily opposed to Charles Rangel getting that seat.
Yeah.
So, and then next I will say of Charles Rangel, what we're doing with the Abyssinian Development Corporation could not have been done without his cooperation.
Right.
He said to me, he said, Reverend, look, Adam was a big figure. He said, why don't you let me try to work with the Congress, you work with the church, and let's work together. So, when we had trouble with the Resolution Trust Company, we called on Charlie. Charlie was right there.
Yeah.
You know, Empowerment Zone, Charlie was right there.
Yeah.
You know, so you got to look at how that pays off. David Dinkins. David Dinkins was restricted by race and class in New York, by police that didn't like him. But to the degree that he was able to make inroads in education and social welfare, worked out.
Right.
Let's not, and Basil Patterson, behind the scenes was very powerful, and them working together did a lot. Let's not overburden the politician with things that they can't do everything. Right. And let's remember that when we talk about the President of the United States now, Barack Obama. They can't do everything. But we have to be smart enough, and take this word with a grain, to use the politician in terms of where he or she is to our advantage, and to work with them to get things done. You know, a lot of politicians the politician really doesn't have that much control over public opinion. The clergy person can do that.
And Sutton knew to have a media base. I mean, what he did with inner city broadcasting is an important component.
And Mark, it's gone, man.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Your listeners should know that people of African descent do not own a radio station in New York City now.
Right.
That's a crime.
And there's someone from, who grew up listening to Frankie Crocker. I mean, it's like Gary Bird. I mean, it's,
inner city broadcasting. And we, not one. And the impact that has. I talk to Bob Law now, and Bob, all the time, Bob is in my ear, man, listen. He said, black radio, what that did for the movement, what it did just for our sensibilities in terms of listening to music.
Yeah.
The messages that went out.
Total experience and sound.
Right. Yeah. So WAOK in Atlanta, and then people across. And then my main minister who worked with me, God bless him, he's transitioned now, Reverend Dino Woodard. Dino liked Boom and Stax Records and Coco and listen, we have lost ground in this area.
Yeah.
And that's why I say younger men and women in ministry, as well as in the other professions, particularly in communication, have to use exactly what you're doing right now in order to get the word out.
Create your own media.
Create your own.
Don't know what you're driving these days, but if you're making that drive from Harlem up to Albany, what are you listening to in your car?
CDs.
What? Who? Well, who are you?
Oh, you mean who am I?
Who
listening
are you listening to?
Oh man, Hezekiah.
Okay.
Hezekiah Walker. I listen to Hezekiah Walker. I'm still, I still listen to Coltrane. I listen to John Coltrane. I listen to he pulls the hat down. Porter.
Oh, Gregory Porter.
Gregory Porter. Let's see. I'm trying to think when the last time I was in the car, who was I listening to? Oh, she's gone now, Celia Cruz.
Yeah.
I listen to Celia. I'm overwhelmed by her. Still a lot of jazz, a lot of Donald Byrd, I'm just trying to think. Still, I got the three tops: Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, and Dinah Washington. Yeah. I'm just, I listen to a lot of Stevie, because what got me back with Stevie was I was mad with the president for a minute, and he used to do this thing, signed, sealed, delivered, I'm yours. And I got tired of hearing him play that, and I just went up and developed a sermon on "You Haven't Done Nothing."
Took you back to Stevie.
It took me back to Stevie Wonder. I love Stevie Wonder. I tell you two people I listen to, and I don't know if you can find this CD today, but it's a CD with Jesse Norman and Kathleen Battle, and they're doing all spiritual. Now, I can't remember the name of the CD. It's on looks like a German label or something. But if you can find it, there's no finer presentation. No. Kathleen is sterling, and Jesse is just, Wagner. Wow. So those are the kinds of things, it's kind of eclectic, but coming out of our experience, I listen to the blues a lot, John Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters.
We've been honored today to have the Reverend Dr. Calvin Butts here in the Left of Black Studios, Duke University, John Hope Franklin Center. Thank you.
Oh, man, it's been a pleasure. I wish we could talk longer. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
God
I
bless
appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back.